December 11, 1941, 11:00 a.m. Berlin, the Reichstag. Adolf Hitler is standing before the German parliament delivering a declaration of war against the United States. The speech follows 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and it formalizes a decision that Germany was not legally required to make. Inside the chamber, the announcement is met with applause, but among senior military professionals listening by radio or reading transcripts later that day, the reaction is restrained and analytical rather than triumphant. Within hours, copies of the declaration reach the offices of the German High Command. Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, records the moment in his private war diary. He does not describe enthusiasm or confidence. He notes the fact of American entry and begins listing implications: manpower, production, geography, shipping. The entries are brief, but the tone is unmistakable. A new variable has entered the war, and it is not one Germany can control. At the Naval High Command, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder reviews reports from German naval intelligence describing American industrial capacity. These are not speculative estimates. They are drawn from pre-war economic data, shipyard output figures, and construction plans already in motion before December 1941. The United States is not starting from zero. It is entering the war with intact infrastructure, untouched factories, and access to raw materials on a scale Germany has never possessed. German planners have studied the United States for years. They know the distances involved. They know the population figures. They know that America has not yet mobilized its full economy. What changes in December 1941 is not the data, but the certainty that those resources will now be directed toward Germany's destruction. For officers trained to think in terms of logistics and replacement rates, the conclusion forms quickly and quietly. Germany's army is already deeply committed on the Eastern Front. Millions of soldiers are engaged against the Soviet Union in a campaign that has failed to achieve its objectives before winter. Losses in men and equipment are severe. Replacement units are being rushed forward with reduced training and inadequate supplies. The Luftwaffe is stretched thin, supporting ground operations while attempting to defend the Reich. The Navy is locked in a submarine war against Britain that depends on sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies can build them. American entry changes the balance in every one of these areas. German intelligence estimates indicate that American shipyards alone could soon outproduce all Axis submarine construction combined. Aircraft production projections suggest numbers that dwarf German output, even if German factories operate at maximum capacity. The figures are not debated, they are accepted. Inside staff meetings, the language becomes cautious. Officers speak in conditional terms. They ask how long Germany can sustain multiple fronts once American material begins arriving in Britain and the Soviet Union. They discuss whether the submarine campaign can succeed before American escort fleets and shipbuilding overwhelm it. These are not discussions of victory, they are discussions of timing. Hitler, however, rejects this framing. He views the United States as politically divided, militarily inexperienced, and lacking the will for a prolonged war. He believes American society is fragile and that racial and economic tensions will undermine mobilization. His assessments are ideological rather than logistical. He dismisses concerns raised by professionals, insisting that Germany has faced stronger coalitions before and prevailed through determination. The disconnect between political leadership and military analysis widens. Halder and his colleagues do not openly challenge the decision. Open dissent is no longer possible in the German command structure. But their private assessments continue. War diary entries accumulate. Memos are circulated with careful phrasing. The conclusion remains consistent. Germany has expanded the war beyond its capacity to control its outcome. The declaration of war also alters Allied coordination. German officers understand this immediately. Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States are now formally aligned. Lend-Lease aid, already flowing, will increase dramatically. Strategic planning will become unified. Germany will face not just enemies, but an integrated system designed to exploit its weaknesses over time. There is no single moment of panic, no dramatic confrontation. The realization settles gradually among men trained to think in numbers rather than slogans. They understand that wars are not won by declarations, but by sustained production and replacement. Germany is already consuming its reserves. The United States has not yet begun to do so. As December 1941 draws to a close, German forces are stalled outside Moscow. Winter has halted offensive operations. Supply lines are strained. Casualties mount. In Berlin, lights still burn in command offices late into the night. Maps are updated. Reports are filed. Calculations are revised. The war has entered a new phase, one defined less by maneuver than by endurance. Among Germany's senior generals, an unspoken understanding takes hold. The war is no longer a contest that can be decided by brilliance or speed. It has become a struggle measured in factories, shipyards, and years. And in that kind of war, the entry of the United States is not a challenge to be overcome, but a weight that will grow heavier with time. The question that remains is not whether Germany can defeat America, but how long the consequences of this decision will take to fully unfold. By early 1942, German military planners are no longer debating whether the United States will mobilize, but how fast it is already doing so. Intelligence summaries compiled by the Army High Command and the Naval War staff circulate through Berlin, outlining American industrial expansion in plain numerical terms. New shipyards are being constructed on both coasts. Automobile plants are being converted to aircraft and tank production. Training programs are expanding simultaneously across the continent. The speed of transformation is noted as unprecedented. Albert Speer, newly elevated within the German armament system, reviews comparative production figures with growing concern. German factories are already operating under strain from Allied bombing, raw material shortages, and labor constraints. Even with efficiency reforms, output gains are incremental. American production curves, by contrast, rise sharply and consistently. They reflect an economy that has not yet reached its limits. Nowhere is the disparity more alarming than in naval warfare. The German submarine campaign depends on a simple calculation. Merchant shipping must be destroyed faster than it can be replaced. In 1940 and 1941, this equation appears favorable. British losses are heavy. Convoys are inadequately protected. U-boat commanders report success. But in 1942, the balance begins to shift. German naval intelligence tracks American shipbuilding monthly. The numbers are stark. Liberty ships are being launched in weeks rather than months. Shipyards adopt assembly line methods previously associated with automobile production. Losses that would cripple Germany are absorbed by the United States with minimal disruption. For every vessel sunk, replacements are already under construction. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the submarine fleet, understands the implications. His officers report high kill rates along the American coast in early 1942, where defenses are initially weak. Yet even as tonnage figures rise, staff analysts warn that success is temporary. American anti-submarine tactics are improving. Escort vessels are increasing in number. Aircraft coverage expands steadily. The window of opportunity is closing. On land, similar patterns emerge. American armored divisions are forming and training in numbers that German planners had not previously confronted. Equipment is standardized, replaceable, and abundant. German divisions, by contrast, are increasingly forced to operate with mixed equipment and diminishing reserves. Losses on the Eastern Front continue to draw resources away from any potential response in the West. The German High Command begins to speak openly, though only in internal documents, about the problem of time. Germany must achieve decisive results before American material strength reaches full operational effect. Every month that passes without a major victory reduces the likelihood of eventual success. This is not a matter of morale or leadership. It is a matter of arithmetic. Hitler remains resistant to these conclusions. He believes that technological superiority, especially in weapons development, will offset numerical inferiority. Projects involving advanced aircraft, rockets, and submarines receive increased attention, yet even proponents of these programs acknowledge delays in production and deployment. Innovation cannot compensate for shortages of fuel, trained crews, and industrial capacity. As 1942 progresses, reports from the Eastern Front worsen. The summer offensive toward the Caucasus consumes vast quantities of men and equipment. Supply lines stretch further, losses mount. The anticipated capture of vital oil fields fails to materialize. Instead of relief, Germany faces increased dependency on limited fuel reserves, further constraining production and mobility. Within German staff circles, a quiet consensus forms. The war is entering a phase where outcomes will be determined less by operational skill than by sustained output. The United States is demonstrating an ability to expand production while simultaneously training personnel and protecting its homeland from attack. Germany is doing the opposite, fighting on multiple fronts while absorbing damage it cannot fully repair. There is no dramatic announcement of this realization. It appears in margins of reports, in cautious language, in the tone of briefings that emphasize constraints rather than opportunities. Senior officers do not speak of defeat, but they begin to speak of limits. The distinction matters, but only briefly. By the end of 1942, the implications are clear to those willing to confront them. Germany is no longer racing toward victory. It is racing against time itself, and time is now aligned with an enemy whose resources are effectively inexhaustible. The war continues, but the nature of the struggle has changed in ways that cannot be reversed. In early 1943, German officers study maps that now tell a different story than they did a year earlier. In North Africa, Axis forces have been pushed steadily westward and then destroyed. The surrender in Tunisia removes any remaining illusion that the Mediterranean can be controlled. In the Atlantic, U-boat losses begin to rise at a rate that alarms even experienced commanders. The reports arriving in Berlin are factual, precise, and increasingly difficult to reconcile with official optimism. Franz Halder is no longer chief of the General Staff, having been dismissed months earlier after repeated disagreements with Hitler. His removal does not silence the assessments he helped shape. His successors reach similar conclusions through independent analysis. The Eastern Front has consumed Germany's strategic reserve. The Western Allies, now including fully mobilized American forces, are assembling strength at a pace that cannot be matched. Albert Speer continues his efforts to increase armaments output, introducing reforms that temporarily raise production despite bombing and labor shortages. The gains are real, but limited. Each increase is offset by expanding Allied capacity. German factories repair damage, while American factories expand unimpeded. Speer understands the comparison. He does not dispute it. He simply lacks the ability to change it. Karl Dönitz faces the consequences of the industrial imbalance most directly. By mid-1943, improved Allied radar, sonar, escort carriers, and long-range aircraft close the gaps that submarines once exploited. U-boat losses become unsustainable. Crews are lost faster than replacements can be trained. Boats are destroyed faster than they can be built. The arithmetic of the Atlantic War now favors the Allies decisively. Internal naval memoranda acknowledge the shift. They do not attribute failure to courage or leadership. They cite material factors, escort density, air coverage, production ratios. These documents remain classified at the time, but their conclusions guide operational decisions. Submarine deployments are reduced. Tactics are altered. None of it reverses the trend. Within the Army High Command, the dilemma becomes psychological as much as strategic. Officers trained to assess reality now operate in an environment where reality is unwelcome. Hitler rejects any discussion of withdrawal or negotiated settlement. He insists that willpower and sacrifice will overcome material disadvantage. Disagreement is equated with disloyalty. Some generals contemplate action outside formal channels. Others retreat into technical duties, focusing narrowly on their areas of responsibility. The system rewards obedience and punishes realism. Knowledge accumulates, but authority does not accompany it. The presence of American forces sharpens this tension. German officers observe the scale of Allied logistics in North Africa and Italy. They note standardized equipment, abundant transport, and a steady flow of reinforcements. These are not temporary expeditions. They are sustained operations supported by an economy operating far from the battlefield and beyond German reach. For many within the German command, the conclusion is now private, but firm. The war cannot be won. The question becomes how long it will continue and at what cost. This understanding does not lead to resignation or collapse. It leads to a form of constrained endurance, where officers continue to execute orders they believe are strategically futile because refusal carries immediate consequences. The moral burden grows heavier with each month. Decisions once framed as tactical now carry existential weight. Losses are no longer investments toward victory, but expenditures toward delay. The distinction is understood by those making the decisions, even if it is never spoken aloud. By late 1943, the war has entered a phase defined by inevitability rather than uncertainty for Germany's professional military leadership. They see the trajectory, they calculate the endpoints. What they lack is the power to alter course. The machinery of the state continues to function, issuing orders, mobilizing resources, demanding sacrifice. But beneath the surface, among those tasked with executing the war, there is a growing awareness that understanding alone does not grant escape. In the summer of 1944, German commanders in France confront a battlefield unlike any they have previously faced. Allied forces land in Normandy with overwhelming material support. Within days, artificial harbors are operational. Roads are crowded with trucks delivering fuel, ammunition, and replacements in continuous movement. The scale is not theoretical, it is visible, audible, and relentless. German units respond with discipline and tactical skill, but shortages are immediate. Fuel rationing limits movement. Air superiority belongs entirely to the Allies, restricting daylight operations. Communications are disrupted by bombing. Reinforcements move slowly, often at night, and arrive incomplete. Commanders understand that these constraints are permanent, not temporary. Erwin Rommel, tasked with defending the Atlantic Wall, reports the same conclusion he has already shared privately. The Allied invasion cannot be contained once it has achieved a foothold. He identifies air power and logistics as decisive factors. German forces can fight effectively at the point of contact, but they cannot maneuver or resupply at scale. The imbalance is structural. Inside Germany, the situation deteriorates further. Allied bombing cripples transportation networks. Synthetic fuel plants are destroyed faster than they can be repaired. Armaments output fluctuates under pressure. Albert Speer attempts to prioritize essential systems, but choices are increasingly forced rather than strategic. There is no surplus left to allocate. On the Eastern Front, Soviet advances continue. Germany now faces simultaneous pressure from east and west, each supported by massive industrial systems. American production sustains not only its own forces, but those of its allies. The strategic depth Germany once relied upon no longer exists. Senior German officers now operate with a clear understanding of the outcome. They plan operations designed to slow the advance rather than reverse it. Defensive lines are established with the expectation that they will eventually fail. Orders emphasize holding ground long enough to delay Allied progress, not to regain initiative. This understanding does not translate into collective action to end the war. The command structure remains rigid. Hitler retains control and rejects proposals for strategic withdrawal or negotiation. Loyalty is enforced through surveillance and punishment. Individual recognition of defeat does not aggregate into institutional change. The human cost escalates. Civilians are caught between advancing fronts and collapsing infrastructure. Soldiers are ordered to hold positions with limited support and little prospect of relief. Losses are sustained for objectives measured in days rather than outcomes. For German generals, the burden is now explicit. They are executing a war they know cannot be won while witnessing the tangible evidence of the enemy's inexhaustible resources. American supply columns move forward steadily. Equipment losses are replaced. Casualties are absorbed and compensated for. The contrast is undeniable. As 1944 ends, the German military apparatus continues to function, but its purpose has narrowed. It exists to delay an outcome already understood. Each decision prolongs the conflict without altering its direction. The collapse is no longer a future event. It is an ongoing process, unfolding in stages that are recognized but not prevented. In the final months of the war, Germany's senior military leadership operates in an environment defined by collapse rather than uncertainty. Allied forces cross the Rhine. Soviet armies advance relentlessly toward Berlin. Fuel shortages immobilize units. Communications break down. Orders continue to flow, but their scope narrows to local survival rather than strategic purpose. The end is no longer debated. It is anticipated. When the war ends in May 1945, those German generals who survive enter captivity carrying not confusion, but memory. Many are questioned extensively by Allied interrogators. Others record private reflections in captivity or later memoirs. Across these accounts, a consistent assessment emerges. The decisive turning point is not a single battle or campaign. It is the entry of the United States into the war. Franz Halder, questioned by American officers and later involved in historical analysis projects, repeatedly emphasizes the industrial imbalance created in late 1941. He does not frame defeat as a failure of tactics or courage. He frames it as an unavoidable outcome once Germany committed itself to a war against opponents whose combined resources exceeded its own by orders of magnitude. Albert Speer, reflecting on the war's final phase, reaches a similar conclusion. He describes a system that achieved remarkable efficiency under pressure, but one that could never overcome structural limitations. Production increases delayed defeat, but did not alter its direction. He acknowledges that once American industry was fully mobilized, Germany's defeat became a matter of time rather than possibility. Karl Dönitz, who briefly succeeds Hitler as head of state, confronts the consequences of the submarine campaign he once led. In post-war analysis, he acknowledges that early successes could not compensate for Allied industrial response. The Atlantic War, once framed as decisive, became an illustration of how production ultimately determines endurance.